Mr. Hughes, same question. If you were the governor the last 4 years, what would you have done to the economy?
Well, I don't think I could have done any worse, but first off, I guess I'd just like to, I have public TV and I have public radio. I got to tell you a quick little story. The only reason I started listening to it and watching it recently is I loaned my truck out to a social worker and got it back and it was stuck on that channel. And I started listening to it, and I tell you what, I support you guys greatly. I think your programs are invaluable. Like today, I mean, I don't think the voters and people watching your program have an understanding that they're going to get to see the other candidates. And truthfully, I'm very impressed with both these guys. But as far as the state of Iowa, it's like any state, you know, we got to focus on jobs. We've seen job reductions here, I find just absolutely ridiculous. State spending is way out of control. And, you know, if you've seen my flyer and stuff like that, one of the things I say, they're money junkies. And they are. If you give a junkie some drugs, he's going to need more drugs. And that's just the way it is. And it's going to be very, very tough to control. You know, and it's going to be very, very tough to change. But I'm very unhappy at the direction of Iowa and the treatment of their people. I'm giving an example. I'm against the cigarette tax. And I'm a non-smoker. But if you look at the statistics, 80% of the people who smoke are low income. So basically, you're just taking the money out of the kids' mouth. The parents that aren't going to quit smoking, you know, and I think they should, don't get me wrong, but yet at the same time, all you're doing is taxing the low income, which hurts the low income, and it seems like an easy group of people to tax because they won't fight back.
But there have been statistics that say it has lowered people smoking. The number of people smoking, it has stopped people from smoking, the lower tax, and some of those are the lower income people, so we're helping in their health spending if we prevent them from smoking. Do you agree with that? I
don't agree with that, just for the simple facts. I think a lot of times statistics are flawed. You know, I actually had people sign my petition. I stood outside cigarette places and listen. You know, I have friends that, boy, they quit for a short while, but they went right back to it. I had a friend I work with. He had lung cancer, lost a lung, lost one lung. You think that would be enough to make somebody quit? Listen, cigarette tobacco industries are putting so much drugs and stuff into that to make sure that you're so hooked you can't give up. That's the way you attack it. You don't attack the low income. Go again after the cigarette industry. You know, there was a lawsuit before, which looked to me like the lawyers come out further ahead than actually the smokers did. But keep going after the people that are producing the product.
I asked Mr. Cooper this, but would you continue to reduce, or would you want to see a reduction of government, and if so, what areas do you see savings and reductions?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, government has, like I said, it's grown into a monster and a junkie. Certainly the court systems is one thing that I want to address greatly. You know, I think that they've just been so out of control that they don't understand what they're doing, and they don't police themselves. I'll give you an example. I was on a panel, and I had one of the senators, you know, right now, that Senator Grassley, and I explained to him a story of Michael. I'll give you an example. Michael went through a divorced 3-year-old daughter. Judge made him go through supervised visits. I've never heard of anything that's not done at the Y or Waypoint, but he made him do supervised visits at his ex-mother-in-law's house. Now, as bad as that is, it gets better, because ex-mother-in-law said that she would rather take a knife and stick it in his throat than look at his face. Now, can you imagine going to a house like that for a neutral, supervised visit with your daughter? Well, it didn't work out. Big surprise there, isn't there? But anyway, he had a friend of mine, a social worker, one that borrowed my truck, matter of fact, go with him to the next visitation. Ex-mother-in-law and ex-wife both come out yelling and scream at him. Sheriff shows up. And the social worker explained, you know, what was going on. You think we'd go back to court and the judge would say, wait a minute, you people are out of control. But what he did, he wouldn't let the social worker testify and took visitation away from Michael for a year because of his unreasonableness.
All right.
So anyway, it's just one of the many
things.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Rosenfeld, if you were governor the last 4 years, how would you have guided us through the economic situation?
Well, first of all, we have to recognize what the source of the economic crisis is. And this is a global crisis. We're in an economic depression, and it's fundamentally a crisis of the system itself. So my point isn't that it can be fixed. I don't think that it can be. The question is, who bears the burden of this crisis? And now, the crisis which has been created by the capitalists is being foisted onto the backs of working people. We're paying for it through unemployment, through massive cutbacks in social services, through a tax on our political rights. And so the proposals that I would be putting forward And the things that I would be organizing to fight for with other workers and working class organizations would be for a massive public works program to put millions of people to work at union scale wages, a shorter work week with no cut in pay, something that our class fought for and won a century ago, the 8-hour day, which has been eroded, and it's something we need to fight for again. We need to fight back against the budget cuts that are hitting our living standards and our conditions. So the question is not what I could do as governor, as much as how I could use the office of governor to be part of this broader fight to build a working class movement, to tap into the power that we have as those that produce all of the wealth of the society.
Many of the things, though, that you mentioned sound a little bit like the stimulus plan that was passed and put into. How different is it?
Well, I think we all recognize that the stimulus plan did not have a substantial impact on the real questions that we're facing, unemployment and these kinds of questions. It wasn't really aimed at doing that. It was aimed at putting a Band-Aid over a hemorrhaging wound. So I am talking about the need for the working class to fight, to demand of this capitalist government that measures be carried out that shift the burden of this crisis off of our backs, and it's going to go much deeper and in a entirely different direction than what the stimulus package, so-called stimulus package, went in.
If there are no jobs, if the jobs continue to disappear, how do you stimulate jobs for companies to create jobs? What type of jobs would they be? What would be an ideal job created under your tenure as governor?
Well, the kind of jobs that I'm interested in are the kind of jobs that working people can make enough money to have a decent living. The fact is that under this system, working people are constantly pitted against each other in a dog-eat-dog competition for jobs. And it's not just me competing with another guy here in Des Moines. We're competing with workers in other states, in other countries, and this is utilized to pit workers against each other and not see what the real source of the problem is. When we blame the immigrant worker, when we blame the Chinese, when we start talking like there's such a thing as an American job that's going overseas, as opposed to starting with solidarity, starting with building the union, starting with fighting for our fellow workers, then that's when we'll be on the right course towards building a movement that can actually be powerful enough to force the government to make the kind of moves that we need to make.
All right. Mr. Roosevelt, thank you. Mr. Cooper, first thing, if you are elected, what would you do? What would be the first piece of legislation you'd like to see crafted that you would sign?
First thing I would do is pardon all nonviolent drug offenders in the state and empty out our prisons of those folks. There's no reason to have nonviolent people in jail. Second thing I would do is try to legalize marijuana in the state. And the third thing I'd do is try to shift from the public education system we have now, where the government essentially has a monopoly on the schools, to try and make it a more competitive market. Try to switch from giving direct state money to the schools themselves to rather attaching money to the individual children, both in K-12 and for college funding, such that they could choose any sort of school that they want, whether that be parochial school, private school, homeschooling, or even the current public schools if people want. But the key is that the public schools would be funded on exactly the same basis as their competitors. What we've done is taken education and made it a monopoly market instead of a very, very competitive market, which is where, in fact, the free market works best. So I don't think there's any change that we could make that would do more for the state than by attaching the money to subsidize education to the individual student.
But it is a competitive environment for each institution. They all want a student. A small private college wants a student just as much as an Iowa State or University of Iowa or Northern Iowa does. They are competitive in that nature in trying to get the best students. So what's that next level?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, the Regents institutions, it's very, very cheap to go there. With the private schools, it's not cheap to go there. What we need to do is get more competition for a higher education.
Okay.
Now, as a professor, I can tell you, students are about the lowest priority at the Regents institutions right now.
There's other priorities. I need to keep moving because I need to ask Mr. Hughes, what would be the first thing you would do as governor?
Well, Eric, that's a great question, and truthfully, there are so many problems in the state of Iowa, I really don't know. I mean, I can tell you jobs, jobs, jobs. Without that, we don't even have a foundation for our state. But what I plan on doing is getting a panel of very, very bright people, far, far more brighter than me, like these guys, and we could get together, have a think tank, and figure out how we can get this economy moving. Mr. Rosenfeld is so right. Rosenthal, I think, is so right. You know, this is a global problem. But we have to, as a governor, I have to focus on Iowa. And Iowa is some of the greatest people in the world. We actually, believe it or not, have some of the most brightest minds in the world live here in Iowa. And you might wonder why, but they do. But why not pull that resource together and have them actually sit down and say, what is our first thing that we need to attack that's going to make life better for Iowans? And that's what I'd like to do.
Mr. Rosenfeld, what would you do as governor? What would you like to see the first bill you sign?
Well, I'd like to step back from your question because it kind of tries to box me in a certain way that I think is reasonable for other candidates. But the kinds of things that we're talking about, the central issues that we're facing, jobs, the rights of immigrant workers, health care access for everyone regardless of ability to pay, making sure that farmers aren't driven off of their land. These are the kinds of things that we need a fight around. We need to fight these things. And it's going to be a fight largely against the government and certainly against the political parties that make up the government, that represent the interests of big business. And so these are the questions that we have to confront. And by fighting around these things, and it includes in the legislative arena, but it's going to be building a movement, one that can actually begin to pose the question. This is not a short-term thing, but pose the question of who holds political power in this country. Because right now, it's a dictatorship of capital. What we need is the rule of the working class. The working class needs to take political power. And so what are the things along that road that we need to advance today that lead in that direction? And that means us tapping into our power as the working class.
All right, this is a yes or no in the final 10 seconds. Term limits for governor. Should there be one?
No.
Should there be term limits?
Yes.
Term limits?
No.
All right. Thank you. Just one final barometer or a chance to have people here. We appreciate your time, gentlemen. Thank you so very much for coming in. It was good to hear everything that you had to say, and we do appreciate your input on the gubernatorial race for the campaign of 2010, and we wish you well in the general election on November 2nd. So our 6-part candidate series continues tomorrow evening on IPTV as we shift our focus from the governor's office to the Iowa Executive Council. We welcome to the table 4 statewide candidates seeking election as Auditor of Iowa and Treasurer of Iowa. Incumbent Democratic Treasurer Michael Fitzgerald and Republican challenger David Jameson will join us, as will incumbent Republican Auditor David Vaught and Democratic challenger John Murphy, each here to discuss the issues prevailing in the world of Iowa finance on the Executive Council. We begin tomorrow night at 6:30, and I hope that you will be joining us. We leave you with this program reminder. Governor Chet Culver and Terry Branstad will be involved in their 3rd and final debate of the campaign tomorrow on Iowa Public Television. The broadcast airs live at noon on World.3, and a rebroadcast is scheduled at 8 p.m. on Iowa Public Television. Mark it down, 6:30 p.m. and then 8 p.m. here on statewide Iowa Public Television. My name is Paul Yeager. Thank you so very much for joining us.
Funding for this program was provided by Friends of Iowa Public Television, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, and generations of families and friends who feel passionate about Iowa Public Television programs.